So you want to launch a podcast. Let's talk about that before you dive in so you can have a breakthrough moment. Welcome to the Strategy Rewind Podcast. I am your host, Miguel LeBron. Here at the Strategy Rewind Podcast, we look at the relationship between goals, strategies, belief, and objective breakthrough. I'm so excited for today's episode. Hey, if we haven't met before, thank you for being connected here today. I am a father, a leader, an author, a strategy coach, and mentor, and I partner with individuals who have a goal but need a strategy. And in this podcast, we focus on the strategy to help you have a breakthrough moment. Hey, welcome to today's podcast episode. I'm so excited you're here today. I'm so excited that you're listening and engaging with this content. Maybe you're thinking to yourself, I want to launch a podcast. I want to go ahead and share my message this way. Oftentimes, sitting before a video camera and just recording yourself may not be the way to go. Rather, it has to do something with editing, or maybe you're just not ready to have your face on camera. I totally get it. Podcasting may be something that you're looking to do, and I just want to help you on that journey, provide some strategies so that as you move towards that, you can have a breakthrough moment. Recently, I was talking to someone who actually mentioned to me that they want to launch their own podcast. And so I asked them some basic questions, which I want to share with you here today. Number one, if you had a podcast, what would it be about? Like, ask yourself this question. If I had a podcast, what would it be about? Is it going to be about cooking? Is it going to be about baking? Is it going to be about trading cards? Is it going to be about video games? Is it going to be about strategies like we talk about here? What is your podcast going to be about? And this is very important. Now, of course, you can have a podcast that talks about everything under the sun. But the fact is that you're not going to reach everyone if you do everything. You need to be more specific on what your podcast is about, because this is going to help you understand your target audience, which is number two. Understand you're not going to reach everyone, and that's okay. Our podcast here, we talk about strategies that can be used in everyday life. Strategy isn't just something that's reserved for companies and organizations. You and I, as people, we use strategy all the time, whether it be launching a business or getting over grief or dealing with depression, real situations that we have to deal with and use strategy, or launching your podcast. So number one, who or what are you talking about, right? Who are you talking to, and what are you talking about? These two things go together. The who and the what needs to be a part of your journey. Here's one thing you also want to consider, and that is do a search. Oftentimes when I talk to people who want to launch a podcast, and I've worked with wonderful individuals that either have a podcast and want to reach more people, or that they're just looking to put a podcast together, oftentimes they jump to the part of it, and I want it to be called, you fill in the blank. Here's what happens. The name may be already used. And what you want to do is you want to do your due diligence. When I knew that I wanted to start a podcast, I started thinking about names. And I liked the idea of talking about strategy because, well, that's what I do. But I also knew that I wanted to look back and have it be more reflective and be able to, well, have individuals come on the podcast and actually talk about the strategies that they have used. And in that, as I began to think, and I had my thinking cap on that day, I thought about Strategy Rewind. And that's how I came up with the name, right? It's kind of looking back, doing a rewind, right? Going backwards, but also looking forward and doing that strategy implementation for that breakthrough moment. Now, the next thing I did after I had this name is that I went ahead and went to, that's right, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. I went to all the social media channels and I began to search Strategy Rewind. No one had the name. I then went ahead and did a domain search. No one had the domain. I then went ahead and did a Google search. No one had the name. Heck, I even went to Microsoft Bing and I did a search there as well. So I binged the name. I mean, I wanted to make sure that no one had the name, because the last thing you want is that when you go to Spotify or you go to Apple Podcast or you go to Google Podcast or any other podcasting location and you say, hey, let me search my podcast to see where it comes up, and it's number 50 because they all have the same name. So you want to really think about, who am I talking to? What am I talking about? But take your time. Do a search on that name so that if indeed someone else has it, how can you maybe alter the name, change the presentation so that yours comes up quick? In fact, you can go ahead right now and you can, well, maybe not right now, but as you're listening to this podcast, you can go ahead and do a search, right? You can go to Spotify or wherever you're listening to this podcast and go ahead and type in Strategy Rewind. And I'm most certain that you're going to find our podcast come either at the top or number one. I know because I've done it. And the thing is that we have to take a time to really think about that part, because the things that people are going to engage with is not just the name, but also that cover art of your podcast. Listen, I have a article that I want to give to you for free. It's actually a worksheet that you can obtain by going to my website, miguellebron.com, and it's called Before You Launch. Here, I go through the outline of what you need to do before launching a podcast. I go through not just doing the search, as I mentioned today, but also some equipment or some things that you may use. You'd be surprised that would be either $0 or maybe really, really inexpensive. So head over to miguellebron.com or use the link in our show notes. There you'll have access to this article, which is titled Before You Launch. It's actually a worksheet you'll be able to download and fill in the blanks for yourself so that when you do decide to launch that podcast, you have your breakthrough moment. And if you're feeling a little stuck and you don't really know where to go, hey, go ahead and schedule a free 30-minute strategy session with me, and I'll help you launch your podcast so you can have the most reach and a breakthrough moment with that. Let me talk to you about our show sponsors, United Marriage Encounter. United Marriage Encounter is a worldwide nonprofit organization dedicated to improving marriages by introducing powerful, practical, ongoing communication strategies. It's such a powerful experience, the weekends that they host for marriages. Early in our marriage, my wife and I went to a weekend, but the strategies that we received were so powerful, we decided to go again, because the truth is that we can always keep growing and learning on how to better communicate. The weekends that they host are presented in a conference type setting, but after that initial meet and greet, no other group sharing is required. Each couple is given enough time to talk privately, freely, and be able to dedicate their entire time to their significant other. Head over to unitedmarriage.com. That's unitedmarriage.com, where there you'll find more details on events that are coming up and may be happening in your neck of the woods. I'm sitting here with Julia Hickman. Julia, thank you so much for being part of the program today.
Hi, Miguel. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, ma'am. For those who aren't familiar with the amazing things you're doing, let them know about yourself.
Sure, yeah. So a little bit about me. I'm a mom of 2 kids, wife, and I guess my start in the online world was a few years ago, about 3.5 years ago, 3 years ago, I think. I started out as an online fitness coach. I'm such a fitness fanatic. I love health and wellness and inspiring and motivating others to live better lives by taking care of themselves better through movement. And that really led me to, after I had my second child, I had my daughter, to kind of come to a point where I was like, is this really what I want to be doing? Is this what I want to focus on and take to the next level? And I took a little bit of time off and thought about my big picture, my goals, and who I really liked working with. And I realized that I really loved working with entrepreneurs and sort of becoming like an intrapreneur, meaning working like in somebody's business without being an employee. Being able to bring like strategic ideas and helping the entrepreneur, the CEO, with like the big picture and managing different aspects of the business. So I started my new business just a few months ago, actually. And so one of the things that I specialize is podcasting. So helping entrepreneurs launch and manage their podcasts, so that way they can just sit back, hit record, and I can oversee all the little details that podcasting requires.
Julia, you mentioned you were in one lane and then you pivoted to another and really anchored down on what it is that you want to do. And oftentimes when we talk about podcasting, for example, and sharing your message, one has to pick a lane, so to speak, and really pick a niche, as they say. And what strategies could we provide for those who are thinking about launching a podcast and instead of being broad, need to pick a lane or pick a niche?
Exactly. It's such a great question. And I'm sure people have heard this, or maybe they haven't heard this, but being a generalist doesn't really do you much good, right? Like if you need to go see if you need to go see a doctor and, you have issues with your foot, right? Like you don't want to just go to your regular doctor. You want to go to a foot specialist, right? So that's why you want to become a specialist, because then you really show up as a true expert, as an authority in your field. And guess what? You can charge more for that. So what I would say to somebody when they're thinking about starting a podcast is to have that end goal in mind. So don't just think oh, you know what? I love talking, so I'm just going to start a podcast. Or, oh, you know what? I do video all the time, so why don't I just do a podcast? Because what could happen is it could become this time-consuming hobby that doesn't really add to your bottom line. And, then you give up and then you stop podcasting and then you're like, oh, I just wasted all that on nothing, right? So have an end goal in mind. And the type of entrepreneurs that I work with are in the coaching field. So they really have, but their main goal really is to bring revenue through their programs, right? So they're not really focusing on, for example, affiliate, or, they're not looking for sponsorships for their podcast. They're looking more to do free podcasting, and they use their podcast sort of as a funnel into their programs. So have that end goal in mind. What is the purpose? Do you want to create an audience with your podcast that you could sell to and, have high ticket clients that you serve through your podcast? So have that end goal in mind, first of all, and then think about, okay, who are the people that I want to bring to this, podcasting community that I create? Where, what messages do I want to have your message in mind, your overall message, because it might need to be a little bit different than what you talk about in your live videos. If you're already doing live videos, you might need to tweak it a little bit. And yeah, think about the format that you want. I mean, you could have like Miguel, he brings guests. So you might want to bring guests. You want to bring other experts who cover other areas that you might not touch upon in your expertise. Or maybe you just want to do solo episodes. I follow some podcasts where they do just coaching, you can kind of listen in on how they coach someone who's in their program. So there's really, you can get very creative when it comes to your podcast. But again, you just have to have that end goal in mind and really know what you think you are going to be driving your people to. So that way you're not just, recording just to record, and so that it ends up being something that adds dollars to your bottom line, like I said.
Yeah, I think monetizing for many individuals, monetizing their podcast is a scary thing, right? You don't want to put a price on it, but at the same time, it's turning that hobby, turning that passion into a profit. And as Pat Flynn says, the riches are in the niches. So as you said, when you anchor down on that message, it becomes a lot more easier to serve people. I know some individuals that have difficulty in hearing their own voice. So a basic fear or a basic thing that may hinder the desire of wanting to do it, right? Kind of getting over their own voice. What are some other fears that you may have seen, or some other things that may stand in the way from someone actually being able to make the step of launching their podcast?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I hear a lot is, it's just so overwhelming, all the the tech and the editing and the promoting. There's so much that it requires, and yes, that could be time consuming, but again, it's sort of it helps to have like a strategy, right? So being really organized with your time. And if this is something that you're going to do yourself, it's okay, on this, maybe you batch record some episodes, right? So that on this day you batch record your episodes. Depending on how you like to do your schedule, maybe you do your editing right away, or maybe you do your editing on another day. But like having really like these purposeful blocks of time where you focus on whatever task it is that you need to do, or having somebody do it for you. That's like something that I do for clients. So they hand that off to me. But yeah, being really intentional with your time. Otherwise it's overwhelming. Otherwise it's like, okay, I have to record. Oh, I'm supposed to launch, an episode tomorrow, and I don't have time to record today. What am I going to do? So not letting that happen to you by being really organized with how, like, when you're going to record, when you're going to edit, when you're going to create like your promotional pieces, and really sticking to that. And sometimes that's why it helps to also have someone who's helping you with that, because knowing like, oh, I have to get my episode recorded because, my podcast person needs it to do their thing. So that having that like accountability to get your episode done is also really helpful when you have somebody who's helping you with a podcast.
Awesome. Fantastic strategies you've provided here today, Julia. Julia, for those who are listening and they want to get connected with you, they're like, I want to launch my podcast. This is the year. How could they get connected with you?
Yeah, so they could reach me on Facebook. Facebook is a wonderful place to reach out to me. So they can look me up, Julia Hickman. I have a Facebook page, facebook.com/Julia Hickman and Co. And also my website is juliamhickman.com.
Thank you so much for being part of the program today, Julia.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for everyone who has been connected here today on Strategy Rewind Podcast. For more information on this podcast, head over to strategyrewind.com. Of course, I also want to thank today's guest and encourage you to head over to the show notes of this episode, as you can find details on what they're doing and how you can connect with them. There in the show notes, you'll also find information on today's show sponsor, which is United Marriage Encounter. Remember, they have events going on all through the calendar year and even in your neck of the woods. Of course, if you'd like to be a sponsor of this podcast, head over to miguellebron.com. There you'll find details not only of how you can become a sponsor of this podcast, but also information on Miguel LeBron coaching. As always, please consider subscribing and sharing this podcast. And of course, surround yourself with people that will nourish your vision.